Dustin, a handsome and talented final-year medical student, was the best in his class, and all his professors predicted a successful career for him. His mother, Mrs. Thomas, a doctor of medicine and obstetrician-gynecologist, dreamed all her life that her son would become a surgeon, and on her patronage, Dustin was admitted as an intern to a prestigious clinic. It was there that he met Isabella. It was by chance. The man was hurrying down the corridor and stumbled over the bucket of a young cleaner who was just mopping the floor. He apologized, and surprisingly, over time, this casual acquaintance grew into love. Dustin found it easy and pleasant to be with Isabella. He idolized this pure, kind and loving girl, and was convinced that there was no other like her any more. Her father had died when she was young, and the girl's mother died 3 years ago, so Isabella had to rely only on herself. Dustin was only embarrassed by Isabella's lack of education and sufficient upbringing. She was simple and ingenious, but that was her uniqueness. Besides, the girl was caring, a good cook, and was a very creative person. "Dustin, why don't you introduce me to your girlfriend?" said Mrs. Thomas, who had heard rumours about her son's affairs. Dustin was well aware of his mother's heavy character. No girl had ever passed Mrs. Thomas's strict censorship. The young couple had already begun to think about marriage, and Dustin was anxiously awaiting the impending meeting of Isabella and his mother. Isabella was also very nervous, and wanting Dustin's mother to like her, overdid it. Her makeup was too bright, and the expensive green dress she borrowed from her friend looked ridiculous and inappropriate on her. When Dustin saw what his beloved had done to herself, he was speechless, but he did not dare to point out her mistakes. Mrs. Thomas greeted Isabella coolly, but behaved demonstratively politely, and even complimented the girl's dress. Isabella smiled trustingly in return, accepting the compliment at face value. When they entered the living room, they saw a charming blonde in an elegant, powder-coloured dress, and with her hair and makeup done by the hands of a skilled master. Mrs. Thomas introduced the girl as Angela, the daughter of her good friend. In addition, the girl was also a doctor. Isabella froze in admiration. She was not jealous, but sincerely admired the beauty. Dustin, on the other hand, had very different feelings. He understood very well why Angela was in their house. "So that's what you are, mother's friend's daughter," he blurted out mockingly, surprised at his own boldness and audacity. Mrs. Thomas immediately burst out and threw an angry look at her son, but Angela only smiled and looked languidly at Dustin. "I'm pleased to meet you too, because I've heard a lot about you from your mother." Tension rose. The conversation did not stick, and Mrs. Thomas did everything to make Isabella feel uncomfortable. Dustin could hardly wait until the evening was over, and with a sigh of relief went to see his beloved off. "I'm sorry, I acted so foolishly," said Isabella pitifully. "No, it's all right. I'm sure Mum liked you." Hardly choosing his words, Dustin replied, "I don't think so. I've seen the way she looks at me, and the way she looks at Angela," said the girl, with bitterness in her voice. The next few days were a nightmare for Dustin. His mother constantly tried to convince him that Angela was more suitable for him. Dustin was angry at his mother, but most of all because he himself increasingly felt that she was right. Angela was smart, beautiful, and it was not a shame to appear with her in any society, and Dustin thought regrettably that Isabella was not like her at all. Then one day he met Angela at his mother's house again. They were going to the theatre, but Dustin's mother, referring to illness, could not go and insisted that her son keep Angela company. It was useless to resist, and Dustin, with a heavy sigh, took Angela to the theatre. At first they were silent, but soon Angela engaged him in an easy conversation, and Dustin was surprised how clever, educated she was, and had a great sense of humour. The man involuntarily compared Angela with Isabella, and realized how much his girlfriend loses to this witty, spectacular beauty. The pleasant emotions of the play brought the young couple even closer together. Dustin was ashamed in front of Isabella, but he could not decide to break off relations with her. Everything was solved by itself. Isabella happened to see Dustin with Angela in their favourite cafe. Dustin looked tenderly at Angela, held her hand in his, and periodically whispered something passionately in her ear. Isabella did not try to figure things out, but simply went home. Her tears were choking her, but she did not allow herself to become hysterical, and just waited for a call from Dustin. But he never called, and after a week, Isabella could not stand it, and wrote him a message with the only question, "Is it over?" Dustin, with only a slight hesitation, wrote back, "Yes, I'm sorry." After the wedding, Dustin and Angela spent a luxurious honeymoon together. At first, Dustin's new life seemed like a fairy tale, especially when the happy family life was complemented by an active career growth, also not without the help of his mother's good connections. But Dustin was indeed a talented surgeon, and sometimes rescued the most hopeless patients. Nevertheless, his career demanded sacrifice, and Dustin had to spend a lot of time at work. Sometimes he was not at home for 2 days. Meanwhile, Angela did not even think of boredom without her husband, and easily found entertainment in the arms of the head of the hospital where she worked. At the same time, she deftly manipulated her adoring husband, forcing him to obediently comply with all her wishes. She often took offence, behaved coldly, and, in exchange for forgiveness, got what she wanted. The more their wealth increased, the more capricious Angela became, and the more the number of her lovers increased. Dustin did not suspect anything, immersing himself in his work, and at home he preferred to be under the power of his beautiful wife. True, sometimes, in moments of his wife's hysterical antics, he remembered regretfully the quiet, caring Isabella. No one knows how long Dustin would have been under the illusion of a happy marriage, but one day one of Angela's offended lovers sent him an email, pictures of his naked wife. Dustin quickly found out that it turns out everybody around had heard about his wife's affairs, and he was the only one who was blind. The man did not know how to get over it. He called his wife to talk, but she, without a shadow of remorse, confirmed everything, and even made Dustin guilty. That same evening, he packed his bags and left for a hotel. He spent the next few days in the bars, never showing up for work. He was not fired, only because the management of the clinic valued him as a specialist, and thus they sent him on leave for a week so he could get his mind right. But Dustin only went deeper into a binge. As a result, when he showed up at work, he was suspended from the planned operation, as he was unable to operate. Despite this, the head of the clinic still wanted to solve the problem quietly, but Dustin, still not fully aware of what he was doing, made a grand scandal in his office and was immediately fired. And even Mrs. Thomas could not help it. Always calm and balanced, it was as if Dustin had lost his mind. He went on a drinking binge for several months and was eventually sent to therapy. Dustin's life was rapidly falling apart. His career as a surgeon was over. After treatment, the man felt better, and he decided to stop dulling his pain with alcohol and plunged into work. Of course, he was unable to find work at the same level as before, and only thanks to protection from an old friend, Dustin managed to find a job at a small state hospital in a not very prestigious area of the city. There, he quickly earned the respect of his colleagues and the love of his patients, but he was not allowed to operate. Dustin lived as if in a fog, doing his job, and this went on until one incident turned his whole life upside down. A 7-year-old girl was admitted to their hospital in serious condition after an accident. She and her mother had been hit by a car, but the woman had got away with a couple of scratches, but the girl was not so lucky. The injuries were so severe that none of the hospital's surgeons dared to take on such a complicated surgery, and they were consulting on what to do. Dustin was not concerned with this situation. He had not operated for a long time, but suddenly seeing him, the girl's mother changed her face and rushed to him. It was Isabella. "Dustin, please save Martha. I'm begging you. You're the surgeon. Everyone here refuses, and if they take her to another hospital, they won't have time." "Isabella, I'm sorry, but I don't operate anymore. I had no idea you had a child. I'm really sorry." "Please, do something," cried Isabella and fell to her knees. "It's your daughter. Do you understand? Your daughter." Dustin stood in a daze for a second, not understanding whether Isabella was telling the truth or just out of her mind. And then he shouted, "I need the operating room, urgently. We'll save her." The operation was successful. Martha was quickly on the mend, and every day, looking at her face, Dustin felt as if he saw himself in childhood. Isabella admitted that at the time when they wrote their last messages to each other, she had already known she was pregnant, but decided not to tell him. She believed that if Dustin married her because of the baby, they could not be happy. Yes, it was difficult for her to be alone. Money was not always enough, and the woman often fell into despair at the thought of not being able to provide a decent life for her child. To distract herself, she immersed herself in creativity, gradually improving her skills, and over time turned her hobby into a decent income. She was no longer in a cleaning field. She was an in-demand artist whose paintings and collectible dolls were worth decent money. She never got married. Isabella disliked the way men treated her child, and as well, there was no one to leave her with, so she could not go on a date. The more Isabella told Dustin about herself, the more he wanted to fix everything, and he began to act. First, he started to bring gifts to Martha. Then he asked her to tell his daughter that he was her father. Isabella didn't mind because she knew how much the little girl wanted to have a father. "Will Daddy live with us now?" asked the delighted girl hopefully. "No," replied Isabella softly, "but he will be visiting you very often." Dustin did not argue, but still got his way in the end. Seeing the way Dustin treated the girl, Isabella could not resist for long, and the former feelings flared up again. They started to live together, and after a while, Dustin and Isabella celebrated a modest wedding, inviting only their closest friends. Dustin's mother was not invited. The man's life once again started to shine in bright colours. He regained his qualifications as a surgeon and felt pleasure in his favourite work. His daughter completely recovered from her injury and went to school, pleasing her parents with her success. Isabella continued to do her favourite craft, only now her dolls and paintings were no longer filled with sadness, but literally exuded happiness. One day, as Dustin nervously paced the corridor of the maternity hospital, waiting for the birth of his son, the phone rang in his pocket. The number was unfamiliar. "Son, please don't hang up." He heard his mother's voice. "Forgive me, I feel so alone, but it's all my own fault. I miss you so much." "Mum, I do not mind, but there is one condition. You do not interfere in our life, and we will decide how to live our lives ourselves." "Of course, son, I promise." "Well, then come here. Isabella is in labour right now," said Dustin cheerfully. And as soon as she heard these words, the loud cries of his newborn son sounded outside the room door, and Dustin could not hold back the tears of happiness.